The late 1800s was a period full of greed and monopolies and corporate expansion and terrible living conditions for basically everyone else than the rich. But to counteract this age rose a movement called the Progressives. If the Gilded Age was the period where everyone messed everything up, the Progressive Age was the period where people actually tried to fix those things. And one of those things was the problem of nature. During the Industrial Revolution and westward expansion, natural resources were heavily exploited. Land speculators and developers took over large swaths of forests and prairies. Mining companies practiced improper and wasteful mining practices. Through this way of assuming that America was a seemingly inexhaustible supply of natural resources, these companies developed a tradition of waste. Well, now after all that depressing stuff, back to the Progressives. The Progressives were people like Henry David Thoreau, John Muir, Walt Whitman, the members of the Hudson Valley River School, and Upton Sinclair. Progressives were often concerned with the improvement of health standards, the improvement of working conditions, and like I've said, wildlife conservation. Those mostly concerned with wildlife were labeled conservationists. Alarmed by the government's attitude towards the natural world, conservationists called for federal supervision of the nation's resources and the preservation of those resources for future generations. A nice little idea. The American landscape was the point of pride for the American people. Both European and American scenery provided ample examples of beauty and picturesque scenery, but the American wilderness was something that Europe, with all its refinement and stiff industrialization, lacked. American wilderness was celebrated by writers such as Emerson and Muir, Thoreau, and Whitman. It appeared in their writing, art, and photography, and soon became an icon of American identity. In the northeastern United States, these romantic depictions of nature were popularized in the works of the Hudson Valley River School landscape painters, including Thomas Cole and Frederick Edwin Church. But keep in mind, they were producing these works to inspire the public to pressure the government to really protect these areas. And lucky for them, they found a sympathetic ear and a man of action in the newly elected president, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was basically the Crocodile Dundee of his day. He was famous for wrestling bears, going on long expeditions into the wilderness, and being an overall cool guy. Fun fact, he was also the first president to win a Nobel Peace Prize. But in 1901, Roosevelt wrote to naturalist John Muir asking him to be his guide at a small valley in California called Yosemite. "I do not want anyone with me but you, and I want to drop politics absolutely for 4 days and just be out there in the open," the president wrote. The camping trip finally took place in 1903. Roosevelt and Muir camped for 3 nights among sequoias. They woke up covered in a thin layer of snow, visited El Capitan in the sunset, and were photographed at Glacier Point. This trip can really be considered the most significant point ever in the history of American conservation. This is because, on his return, Roosevelt signed a federal law to create 51 bird reserves, 18 national monuments, and 5 so-called national parks. In following years, the conservation movement gained more and more followers. In 1935, after Aldo Leopold's publication of A Sand County Almanac, it exploded, inspiring more and more so-called citizen naturalists. But nothing will ever top the determination of the founding members of the Progressives and Conservationists. One could really say that it was their gusto that single-handedly saved the American wilderness from those guys.